Morning, everyone. Happy Open the Advent Calendar Day. And welcome to the News Agenda with me, Fleet Street Fox. And today I'm joined by the Mirror's Deputy Political Editor, Ben Glaze. Morning, Ben.
Morning. Hello.
This is the People's Paper Review. So we want you to get into the comments, ask us your questions. We can't answer them all. We will answer the best ones. And the super duper best ones get a News Agenda mug. Everybody wants one. It's the only present to have for Christmas. So work up the best questions you can. So what have we got today? Well, the Mirror has splashed on what should be the astonishing revelation that last Christmas, while he was forbidding families to get together in a lockdown, we all know was the result of him refusing to lock down when he should, Boris Johnson was having Christmas parties in Downing Street. There was a boozy leaving do with staffers, cheek by jowl in a COVID hellhole in November during the lockdown, and an unofficial work party the week before Christmas while the rest of London was in Tier 3. Now take us through this, Ben, because Downing Street says no rules were broken with any of this. So does that mean they admit that it happened?
Right, they're not denying that the events took place. What they are saying is that the events didn't break the rules. So what we've got is this revelations by my colleague Pippa Carrere, the political editor, that on November the 27th, so that was whilst England was in a month-long lockdown, the second national lockdown, that dozens of Number 10 staff, including the Prime Minister himself, crowded into a small room when at the time social gatherings were banned. Now, that was for a leaving do for an unnamed Number 10 official, we believe. And then the second event that took place was whilst London was in tier 3 restrictions, which you remember were very strict curbs, almost akin to a formal lockdown anyway. So that was on December the 18th. And it said then that about 40 or 50 staff had an unofficial Christmas party effectively, which included a secret Santa. Now at the time, work meetings were allowed to take place, but of course, unnecessary social gatherings, parties were not. So what it looks like happened is that people were going into Number 10 for work purposes, which was allowed under the rules at the time. And then they probably got a few bottles of wine in, a few cans in afterwards to have a bit of a Christmas shindig. The reports also claim that Carrie Johnson has hosted parties up in the Downing Street flat during the lockdown and whilst restrictions were in place, which her spokeswoman says is nonsense. And it should be said as well that Downing Street is insisting this morning that no rules were broken. We got Prime Minister's questions today, as you know, Susie, at noon. So it's highly likely that someone will reference this report during that half-hour grilling for Boris Johnson. And then, of course, we as journalists get to ask Number 10 about it in more detail after Prime Minister's questions this afternoon.
In the lobby briefings, we shall see. So the leaving do was while the indoor social gatherings were banned. in lockdown, and the works party, complete with Secret Santa, so definitely a party, was held when only necessary meetings for work were okay. So although they were all allowed to be in the office all day, they were able to socialize, be in a social, I suppose, situation at work all day. The same people wouldn't have had, they might argue, an increased risk of giving the infection to each other at the work party afterwards if they stayed at their desk and had a booze up. And I can think of a newspaper that did something very similar, not ours. But Matt Hancock resigned over an unnecessary work meeting. So if this was a breach of the rules, which is what it exactly looks like, who's going to finally get the blame for it? Is it going to be the person who organised the party? Because it's not going to be Boris, is it? He's never going to get the blame for this.
Well, Teflon Boris, I mean, even if he does get the blame for it, will it make any difference? And it should be said, of course, this is the latest in a long line of revelations and allegations about the rule-breaking Prime Minister. Countless examples of him not wearing a mask or half wearing a mask when he should have done. Obviously, there was the story about 18 months ago about Dominic Cummings and his trip to Barnard Castle. So there's numerous examples of number 10 officials and the Prime Minister himself breaking the rules, bending the rules. This thing about the gathering, you say that if you're together professionally during the day, they might say, what's the difference if you have a few drinks together in the evening? Well, part of the argument all along has been that people behave differently when alcohol is involved because you lose your inhibitions. And, you allegedly, Susie, now I don't know. One couldn't possibly comment on this, but people tend to talk closer to each other. You'll talk louder as you get a bit more merry, and then you expel more air. So if the germs are airborne, which of course we know they are, it makes it more likely. And that's why there have been restrictions previously, although not this time, around hospitality settings where alcohol is involved. And you remember once upon a time, there was the curfew of, I think, 10 o'clock. You had to be out of the pub by then. That was to stop you getting smashed and spreading the virus more. So people do behave differently, even if you're amongst colleagues, working 10 hours a day. If you then have a few drinks with them, it's arguably makes it more likely that you're going to spread coronavirus.
Exactly. Now, Karen says, what are the new restrictions and did Boris break the rules last Christmas? 2 bits of the question here. The new restrictions are mandatory masks back on in all public places and public transport, unless it's a hospitality setting, so theatres, cinemas, restaurants. You do now have to self-isolate if you are pinged, even if you're double jabbed, which you didn't have to do before that. There's a third one. What's the third one, Ben? I've forgotten. Have you been paying attention?
Masks, self-isolation. The self-isolation is not if you're pinged, it's if you're ordered to by NHS Test and Trace still.
Sorry, yeah.
And if you're coming back, if you're arriving into the UK.
Travel thing, I have the lateral flow.
I say this as someone who, has become more aware of these rules in recent days.
That's what's changed, Karen. You have to be tested if you come back into the UK. And whether or not Boris broke the rules at Christmas, people in Downing Street seem to have broken the rules pretty clearly. But we've just had Geoffrey Cox, who was actually caught on video breaking the rules using his parliamentary office for private work. And apparently that was fine. And no one's bothered about that. So who knows? Now, Mike says, given that former Chancellor Philip Hammond is to face no action for the lobbying he did, and Geoffrey Cox, great minds, Mike, will face no investigation despite admitting he used his office once for private work, what rule or law would the team like to break without consequences? Oh, trespass. Always. It's always.
Where would you trespass?
Go. What about you, Ben?
Where would you trespass?
Just anywhere. Just hell of it. Downing Street, preferably. Buckingham Palace. Queen's bathroom. I don't care. Anywhere that the hoi polloi aren't supposed to go. I want to go and stand there. Just trespass. What
rule would I break if it was consequence free?
Yeah.
I don't know. It's not really in my character to think like that, to be perfectly honest. I'll ponder it later.
You're such a goody-goody. I had a crime. I had a civil offence at my fingertips that I wanted to break. Not even robbery, armed robbery, nothing. You want to go and steal some money from the lottery or something?
The thing is, though, it's not consequence free, is it? Like, you might not get punished by the criminal justice situation, but it's entirely possible that somebody else loses out. Like, you might go speeding and not get caught, but what if you crash a car and kill someone?
Whereas trespassing in Downing Street is a victimless crime.
Yeah, right. I'll come trespassing with you.
Ben, you gotta be more of a criminal mastermind, mate. Now keep asking us your comments. What do you think about Boris Johnson's works party when he shouldn't have been having works parties? What do you think about throwing events like this in Downing Street when the rest of us couldn't, or we were banned from seeing our families? Paul says, if we go back into lockdown, I won't be following any rules. The UK government have treated us like a joke. And that's part of the problem here, isn't it, Ben? Is the fact that it causes so much resentment. When there's this rule breaking, most of us may carry on going, well, all right, we've got to do the right thing for our families and for other people, and we just ignore what the government says. But there are a lot of people who are really cross about this sort of thing. And then when Boris Johnson says, I need to restrict you in some way, they're just going to ignore it. That's the cost of what he's doing here. Do they factor any of that in?
This is the problem, is, do as I say, not as I do. Hypocrisy is a word here, isn't it? If they're telling it, the people who govern us make the rules. If they don't abide by them themselves, then how can they expect the rest of us to? The fact is, the vast majority of us do respect the rules and do follow the rules. I've just spent best part of an hour on a delayed train sweating with my face mask on. I resented wearing it, but it's the law. I'm wearing it. It is what we were told to do. And then if I see a picture of the Prime Minister not wearing his later today, in his car or whatever, then will it frustrate me? Absolutely. And I suspect it would most people. But most of us do end up following the rules, even if those that govern us and make those rules don't themselves.
Yeah, and at least you're not wearing a mask for 12 hours while stood on your feet dealing with people who are dying and can't breathe, like most medics.
Well, so indeed, my hour-long commute. Yes, you're quite correct.
Exactly. Anyone who resents going, I'm so upset and offended I have to wear a mask for 10 minutes or 5 minutes and I pop in the chippy, just mate, you're not on an ICU ward, so shut up and stop moaning. Now, not to you, but the person out there. Now, Julie says, are the government going to put us in another lockdown? We are asked this question a lot at the moment. I said on Monday, it depends a bit on how the Omicron works out. They're going to find out in the next couple of weeks just how infectious and how problematic it might be. I reckon, personally, our chances are probably about 1 in 3, but that's just a guess as an observer, not anyone who knows anything about anything else. Ben, you're in Westminster, you're sitting there in Parliament right now. The next stage would be Plan B, which is a little bit more than what we've currently got, and working from home and stuff. So we're still a couple of steps away from a lockdown, aren't we?
Yeah, indeed. Plan B would involve working from home and vaccine passports in certain venues, hospitality venues, that sort of thing. And the government has, retained the powers to do that. The working from home advice, I mean, that's interesting because a formal work from home edict from the government would be quite a big deal. A lot of companies are being very flexible with their employees anyway, saying work from home if you feel like it, work from home a few days a week. They're leaving it, the government sort of wants businesses, whilst encouraging people back to the office as they were earlier, go and spend money in the town centre, city centre, after work, go for a couple of pints, whatever. They're not in a situation where they're currently doing that, but they're not saying, again, work from home. They're leaving it to businesses to sort things out for themselves. It's one of the more liberal approaches that the government has taken throughout this, throughout the latter stages. In terms of vaccine passports, that'd be far more controversial, because if you weren't double jabbed, or it may end up eventually being triple jabbed as we're all getting boosters, if you didn't that, or proof of a negative test, you might not be allowed into certain venues. Now, again, it was within businesses' power. If you're the landlord of a pub, you decide who comes into your pub. If you want to set that as a rule yourself, you absolutely can do that. For the government to mandate it would be a big deal, and it would cause huge outrage on the Conservative backbenchers among those sort of harder right libertarian Conservatives. The government can do that, and it is possible that will happen. In terms of the actual answer to the question about formal lockdown, I think that's highly unlikely that we will end up back in a situation where we're all confined to our homes, pubs are shut, restaurants are shut, non-essential retail is shut for weeks, months on end. I don't see that happening again, because it is very different from where we were this time last year, or indeed January and February this year.
Exactly. I think if there was anything that even resembled a lockdown, it would be not like the first one. It would be like the later one, which is when a lot of things were still open and people were still able to have quite a lot of freedom, really considering. But now the issue, there's lots of anonymous sources here in Pippa's article talking about the long hours worked in Downing Street and the need to let off steam at the end of a long day, one of them says. But there's another one in there quoted saying, well, tell that to the doctors and nurses and social care workers. They didn't go partying at the end of a long day. It does seem from reading this, and I haven't spoken to Pippa, I'm not asking where it's come from, but it seems like reading it that it's come from multiple sources within Downing Street. And there does seem to be a few grudges born on it from one side or another. And it is happening at just the time that the Prime Minister is under pressure to put some new Christmas curbs in place, perhaps. So our Pippa's faithfully following the story, of course, but the reason these people are leaking it now to a paper which is unfriendly to the government, is it because perhaps they're trying to bounce the Prime Minister in some way, Ben, into deciding, into or out of such a decision about the curbs?
I don't know. Straight answer to that. In terms of like the Kremlinology, we could be trying to look for something that isn't there. It might just be that some people have suddenly realised that they shouldn't have done it. Or that they're upset now what went on and have decided to speak about it now. I don't know is the straight answer. But in terms of trying to force the Prime Minister to announce something now, I'd have thought that was unlikely, to be honest. I think it might just be people letting off steam and venting and saying, well, this is what happened last time. And of course we are now in the run up to Christmas. If you look at that, the leaving do, that was November the 27th, so that's exactly a year and 3-4 days ago. Yeah, and so now the issue is there, as James mentions, really, the issue is whether any of this stuff's going to cut through to voters. And I said at the start, this should be an astonishing revelation, but it comes on top of what we already know, that Carrie's friend there, Nimco Ali, was in Downing Street for Christmas in a support bubble that suddenly popped up on Christmas Eve and was popped down again on Boxing Day. And that the Prime Minister overlooked, as you've said, Ben, both Barnard Castle and a very smoochy Matt Hancock having an unnecessary work meeting, breaking these same rules, in fact. So our voters, do you think, are they going to be surprised or shocked or angry at any of this? We don't seem to have much anger in the comments today. It's more like resignation from what I can see. Yeah, shocked, no. Shocked, yes. Surprised, no, I think, because it does just play into this ongoing narrative of one rule for them, one rule for the rest of us, and that they don't abide by or seek to bend at every opportunity the rules that they make. So, I think this will play into what people already believe, already think about this government and this Prime Minister. I mean, I've no doubt as well that there'll be some defending Boris Johnson and the number 10 staff who did this will say, they worked together all day and they've just had a few drinks at the end of the day. What's the big deal about it? Well, the big deal is that we weren't allowed to do it. It was literally against the law is the big deal. It's like saying, well, yes, they went and robbed a bank, but so what? They had a very stressful day. What? I've had to think about the rule I'd like to break. It would be joyriding in an Aston Martin. There you go. But that's not a victimless crime, says the owner of the Aston somewhere is very cross at you. It'd be from a showroom. Trespassing in Downing Street with me. But it's reasonable. It's quite a good one. But well done. It's taking you 20 minutes to come up with a law you'd like to bring. Now, Better for Britain says, Boris having a party was shocking. Where was my invite? We weren't invited either, I'm afraid, Better. And Ed, our video producer, does inform me that in the background that the comments he can see, there are some quite angry people there. But Ben's got a story on exactly this, everybody. Well done, Ben. You got a story in the paper. First week back at work after paternity leave, and you've got a tale. He's been down to old Bexley and Sidcup constituency in the promised land of Kent to find out what's happening in a by-election that will be held tomorrow to replace the MP James Brokenshire, who died of cancer a short while ago. Now, we haven't heard much about this at all on the news, Ben. It's been very quiet little campaign up there on the wrong side of the River Medway. But there are reports today that the Tories are suddenly feeling a bit jumpy about this very, very, very safe blue seat. So what did you learn when you were down there? Yeah, it's quite interesting. So this seat of old Bexley and Sidcup, it was created in 1983. It's only ever been won by the Conservatives, and the predecessor constituency, because they all get renamed every now and then. You have to go back to 1946 when Labour last won this and the Conservatives didn't. So it's very much a Conservative stronghold. The majority they've got there at the 2019 general election was just shy of 19,000. I went down there, thinking it's going to be really difficult to find a Labour voter. It wasn't. We spoke to several people who either going to vote Labour or are disillusioned with the Conservatives. Some people, didn't know the by-election was taking place. You often get that because, as you just said, it's a particularly low-profile by-election. I have to say, I don't think Labour will win this, and Labour don't think they're going to win this. But what they do think they might do is put a dent in that Conservative majority. So, yeah, if the Conservative hold the seat, which I think they will, but on a much, much reduced majority, which is potentially what could happen, that'll be chipping away at Boris Johnson's leadership, because even the people who are going to vote Conservative, some of them said that, they're just not impressed with the Prime Minister. People did raise the Peppa Pig speech that the Prime Minister made to the Confederation of British Industry 10 days ago. People raised sleaze allegations. The Labour candidate, Daniel Francis, he's a local councillor, he's a very nice chap. And, he does seem to get it. He seems like a normal bloke. A very pleasant couple of hours down in Kent with him yesterday. And I do think he's capable of at least eating away at that Conservative majority, if not actually winning the seat for Labour.
And who's the Tory candidate?
Louis French, who's my colleague Jason's described him as low wattage. I think he's the sort of person who's going to go under the radar, probably win, and then just be on the Conservative backbenches as more lobby fodder for the Conservatives potentially, which is what they want at the moment. I think the Conservatives will hold the seat. What was interesting as well was we found a Lib Dem voter who, at a by-election, you tend to get a raft of candidates because smaller parties put up candidates because there's only one election taking place on a day, so they can't necessarily, it's not like we've got to spread candidates around the country. So this Lib Dem supporter said, are the Lib Dems standing? Now that's quite interesting because, they come third in this seat. She's an anti-Brexiteer. She's a Lib Dem supporter. She didn't know that they were standing in the seat. So there's a lot of work, I think, for the Liberal Democrats to do if they want to, because that's the sort of area potentially that they could be looking, because they're interested in the sort of outer London areas at the moment, having abandoned their former heartlands in the southwest. So, the fact that they're not recording anything there.
That's the home counties, edge of the home counties, commuter lands, same as Amersham and Chesham, which the Lib Dems won with great. I would have thought they would have been all over it like a rash. They should have been.
As far as I understand it, they're putting more resources into the North Shropshire by-election. It was triggered by Owen Paterson's resignation. What I'm hearing is they're not, they're not saying they're going to win it, but they do seem to be fancying their chances a bit more than we would have thought for another 20-odd thousand majority Conservative seat.
Yeah, they've just made a decision that there's not much point in Sidcup and Old Bexley, and they're going to leave it blue because it's going to be blue sort of thing. And they just resign themselves to the inevitable. But it's always possible to have a surprise, isn't there? Anyone from Sidcup and Old Bexley is watching? Get into the comments. Let us know. What do you think? Who's going to win the by-election tomorrow? Are you going to vote? Did you even know it was happening? Are the Lib Dems standing? Who knows? Mike says, would a progressive alliance give opposition parties a fighting chance in this seat, or those coming up soon? There's lots of talk, isn't there, Ben, about whether Labour and the Lib Dems and the Greens and so on should actually get together and field candidates in cooperation with each other and not against each other in some seats in order to get the Tories out. That requires all those parties to admit they can't possibly win on their own and to cooperate with each other, and also to sort of abandon some of their policies in order to agree with everybody else's policies and form some kind of a coalition. You're asking basically for an awful lot of really quite opinionated people to abandon some of their opinions. It's not going to happen, is it really? No,
I mean, first of all, I think it's overstated that there's this anti-Tory alliance in the country because people don't like being denied choice. So, you want to vote. There's Lib Dem voters who wanted to vote for the Lib Dems. So if the Lib Dems suddenly said, well, we're not standing candidate, whatever, we're just putting we're soft peddling and we encourage our voters to vote Labour to get the evil Tories out. Well, it's too simplistic to do that. And that's in, the microcosm of this Bexley by-election. If you try to do that across the country, right? I've been covering local councils where you have rainbow coalitions, which is similar to this progressive alliance that's being talked about. You're trying to knit together too many disparate views, and it shouldn't be underestimated quite how much a lot of Labour figures hate Lib Dems for their 5 years propping up the coalition, propping up the Conservatives under David Cameron and coalition. And of course, if you were going to have this full progressive alliance, this anti-Tory alliance, you'd need to involve, if you're talking for Westminster now, to win a majority at Westminster, you'd obviously need to involve a Scottish nationalist. If you did that, the one thing they would demand straight off is referendum on Scottish independence yet again. Then you've got unionist parties, Labour and the Liberal Democrats, who would have to agree to that. They would upset all their voters in Scotland if they did that, because people who support Labour or the Lib Dems in Scotland see them as unionist parties. There'd be too much division to start with. So, if let's, for example, say that Labour does much better at the next general election, but not enough to win an outright majority, has to go into some sort of coalition, alliance, whatever you want to call it, deal with other much smaller parties and the SNP, and then he agrees to a referendum. Well, then he's the Prime Minister who's lost the United Kingdom. That's his first act, effectively. I just don't see that happening.
No, I don't see it happening. In theory, yes, great idea, but so is unicorns with jam on. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to happen, I'm afraid, Mike, and the others who are very keen on it. Now, keep getting into the comments. What do you think about Boris Johnson's Christmas parties? Are you fine with it? Do you think this doesn't matter? Do you think it's just a storm in a Whitehall Westminster teacup? Or do you think this is really just beyond the pale and this is the final nail in his coffin and you're never going to vote Tory again? Let us know, get into the comments. But we do have some good news for you. There is some around, and here it is. Now, it takes an adult with the normal number of limbs, with reasonable fitness, perhaps 5 hours to climb up Mount Snowdon. But 4-year-old here, Albie Jr. Thomas, has done it in 3 hours, and he's only got 1 foot. Now, Albie was born with a deformed left foot and a shortened leg. His parents made the very difficult decision when he was 15 months old to have it amputated in order that he'd be able to wear a prosthetic and have more mobility in the long run. And with his 3-hour trip up Snowdon and another less than 2 hours back down again, he's raised £570 so far for Cancer Research UK. We're going to put the link to that in the comments, because 570 quid is not nearly enough, Ben, for what he's managed to do with only 1 foot, frankly. Get in there and bung him a tenner, everybody. But Ben, doesn't this just go to show, I don't know, the sheer resilience of children that who just adapt to what life throws at them far better than most adults?
Yeah, it's astonishing. When I read this morning, I in awe of this child, Albie Jr. I've always wanted. I'm from Wales, Susie, as you know. I've never climbed the highest mountain in my home country. So Albie Jr. at 4 years old has done something that I haven't managed in 39 years. And he's done it in a storm as well.
He did it in a storm, Arwen. He did it quicker than anybody else, and he's done it with 1 foot, Ben.
Yeah, it's amazing. Well, fair play to Albie Jr. and to his dad for going up it. And, it says as well that he wants to attempt the 3 peaks, which of course is the highest mountains in Scotland, Wales and England. So Ben Nevis, Snowdon and Scafell Pike. And you've got to do it in 24 hours travelling between them as well. I mean, if he's done this at 4 years old, I think he'd fly through the 3 peaks. Yeah. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Fair play to him, yeah.
Exactly. Lee says, I can't imagine it being too hard, just putting 1 foot in front of the other. He's only got 1 foot, Lee. Clear off. I'm just amazed. Well done, Albie. You put us all to shame. It's absolutely fantastic work you're doing. Get into the if you look at the top of the comments, we've got the link in there for his fundraiser. Please just go and bung him a £5 or whatever you've got spare, because he absolutely deserves it. Now, we do have some questions to no other questions that we're going to we're not going to round up any other questions or comments. We haven't got time, I'm afraid, at the moment. But thank you, Ben, for joining us. Thank you, everyone, for taking part. Join us again next Monday when we have another edition of the news agenda and presumably the same Prime Minister to talk about then. Bye-bye.